The planet Arvenia was silent under a sky filled with smoke and fire. The once bright cities now lay in ruins covered in dust and broken metal. People hid in the shadows of destroyed buildings, listening to the endless sound of explosions far above. The alien fleet called the Krail Dominion circled the planet like a group of predators ready to finish the hunt they had been attacking for months. Burning villages, destroying bases, cutting off food and water, every human who survived was tired and afraid. They had sent many distress calls to Earth, but no answer ever came. They began to believe they had been forgotten. Captain Alara Miles stood inside the control room of the last standing human outpost. She looked at the cracked screens and flickering lights around her. She could hear the hum of damaged engines and the quiet voices of her crew, trying to keep the systems alive. Their supplies were almost gone. The soldiers were running low on ammunition and medical kits. Many of the young fighters were no more than boys and girls who had seen too much war. They had hope once, but now that hope was fading, like smoke in the wind. Alara looked out at the burning horizon. She had fought in many battles, but none like this. The Krail were different. They were not only stronger in number, but also crueler in their methods. They did not want to conquer. They wanted to erase humanity from the stars. The captain clenched her fists as she remembered the last transmission she sent to Earth. It had been weeks ago and no one replied. The message was short and full of static, a plea for help that vanished into deep space. She wondered if anyone even heard it. Her second officer, Lieutenant Wren, came up behind her. His face covered in dirt and sweat. He handed her a data pad with the latest report. No reinforcements, no communication, and enemy ships closing in from orbit. The captain nodded slowly and gave quiet orders to her team. They were to hold their position, protect the civilians, and buy as much time as possible. She knew it was hopeless, but surrender was never an option. The people of Arvenia had already lost too much. They would not kneel to monsters outside the control center. Soldiers were digging trenches using old metal sheets and pieces of ruined vehicles to form a barricade. Some of them worked in silence while others whispered prayers for their families. Far away in the bunkers, children cried softly, and parents tried to comfort them, telling stories of Earth, a place they might never see again. Night came, and with it came a strange stillness. The alien bombardment stopped for the first time in days. The air was thick and cold, filled with the smell of burned soil. Alara stood on the outer wall, looking up at the stars. They were dim and distant behind the layers of smoke. She thought about her crew, about every person who had trusted her to protect them. She felt the weight of all their lives pressing on her shoulders. She whispered to herself that they would survive somehow, even if no one was coming to save them. Then something changed. One of the technicians inside the outpost shouted for her to come quickly. The radar screens, which had been quiet for hours, began to flicker with strange readings. There was movement far beyond the blockade. Something large moving slowly through deep space. The technician said it looked human, but the signal was weak and distorted. Alara frowned. It could be a trick. The Krail often used false readings. To lure them into traps, she told them to keep scanning. The readings grew stronger as the hours passed. The crew stayed awake all night, watching the monitors. There was something approaching from the far side of the system, but no one could identify. It had had a human signature, but it did not match any known fleet or vessel class. It was like a ghost signal appearing and disappearing between the waves of interference. Alara did not know what to think. She wanted to believe it was help, but she had been disappointed too many times. By morning, the alien fleet began to move again. Their ships shimmered in the upper atmosphere, forming attack patterns. The crew of the outpost prepared for what they thought would be the final assault. Every soldier took position, every gun was loaded. Every eye turned to the sky. The civilians huddled in the bunkers, clutching one another as the alarms rang once more. Suddenly, the alien fleet stopped their movement. They held position, and their communication signals turned chaotic. The sensors picked up strange interference across all channels. It was as if something had disrupted their entire network. No one could explain it. The technicians looked at each other in disbelief. Then one of them gasped as a new transmission came through the main console. It was encrypted but undeniably human. It carried an old emblem, one that no one had seen for decades. The mark of Project Valkyrie. Alara stared at the symbol on the screen, her heart racing. Project Valkyrie was a secret program from Earth's darkest years, long before her time. It was said to have been shut down after developing weapons too dangerous to exist, yet here was proof that it had survived. The message was short and clear. Standby help is inbound. She read it again and again, not believing her own eyes. Could it be true? Could someone have finally come? Outside, the wind howled over the wasteland, and the soldiers looked up in confusion as the ground began to tremble. The captain ordered the scanners to full range and the sky to be observed through all visual sensors. Then, through the smoke clouds and lightning flashes, something enormous appeared at the edge of the atmosphere. It moved without sound, yet the entire planet seemed to feel its presence. The clouds swirled violently as if pulled by gravity itself, and the alien ships shifted in panic. The strange vessel was not sending any radio signals yet. Every radar on the surface could feel its power. It was moving closer, and it was massive. The people of Arvenia watched as the black shape slowly broke through the clouds, its hull shining like dark metal glass. It was larger than any known warship, larger than the alien dreadnoughts that had destroyed their cities. The very sight of it made the alien ships pull back for a moment. Ilara stood speechless as the scanners finally got a clear reading. The vessel was human. It bore the identification code of the Earth Defense Force, but it was from a classification that no one had ever heard of. Then, without warning, the vessel fired a single burst of energy into the sky. It did not hit the planet. Instead, it spread a wave across the upper atmosphere, cutting through the alien communication field in seconds. Every Krail transmission was silenced. The alien ships began to move chaotically, breaking formation as if blinded. The strange vessel hovered in silence above the planet's sky like a dark guardian watching from the storm. The crew in the outpost could hear faint vibrations in the air like a deep hum that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ilara could not look away. She felt something in her chest, a strange mixture of fear and hope. Maybe the stories were true. Maybe Earth had never forgotten. Then maybe this was the answer to every desperate call she had sent into the dark. Her voice trembled as she whispered that maybe humanity had sent their strongest weapon. Maybe this was the day Arvenia would see the light again. The night stretched into dawn, and the massive vessel remained motionless above the clouds, silent and powerful. The alien ships gathered again, uncertain but unwilling to retreat. Ilara knew that whatever this ship was, it had changed everything. The people who had lost all hope began to whisper to one another. Maybe help had truly come from Earth. Maybe they were not alone after all. And for the first time in months, Captain Ilara Miles allowed herself to breathe. She looked at the horizon where the sky burned gold over the ruins, and she whispered that the fight was not over, not yet, because somewhere up there beyond the smoke and fire, Earth's strongest dangerous vessel had finally arrived to answer humanity's call. For 3 long days after the strange vessel appeared above Arvenia, nothing changed. The humans watched the sky in silence while the Krail ships kept their distance. Neither side made a move. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Captain Ilara Miles barely slept. She spent every hour in the command room studying the scans of the unknown ship. It floated above the clouds, motionless like a dark mountain in the sky. The scanners could not read inside it. The energy levels were beyond anything her systems could measure. Every attempt to communicate received no answer. Yet the signal from the ship showed it was human. She could not understand how a human vessel could have such power or why it had come without warning. The people of Arvenia began to whisper stories about it. Some said it was a ghost ship built from the wreckage of old wars. Some believed it carried soldiers from Earth's secret army, and others thought it was not human at all, that it had come from a place beyond the stars to protect them. The soldiers in the trenches looked up every night at its shadow glowing faintly against the stars, and they felt something they had forgotten: hope. But Ilara was not sure. She had seen too much war to believe in miracles. She wanted proof. She sent out small scout drones to circle the planet and approach the vessel. Every one of them lost contact once they came too close to its energy field. The ship seemed to swallow their signals like a void. She stood beside her communications officer, listening to the endless static, wondering if the ship was watching them or ignoring them. Her crew worked quietly around her, afraid to speak. The air was thick with tension outside. The sky was filled with strange lights, and the alien ships began To move again, they circled like predators around something they feared but did not understand. Then, without warning, the Krail fleet began sending new messages. They offered surrender terms for the humans if they handed over the coordinates of the vessel. They called it a threat to their empire. They said it was not a human ship but a forbidden weapon that Earth had once used to destroy entire worlds. Ilara listened to their transmission and said nothing. She ordered her crew to block all channels and to prepare the ground defenses in case of another attack. The people in the outpost could feel the fear in the air. Even the children in the bunkers knew something terrible was coming. That night, Ilara stood alone. Outside the command center, the wind was cold and sharp. Blowing dust across the empty plains, the stars were dim behind the gray clouds, and above them, she could see the faint shape of the mysterious ship, like a dark moon floating between heaven and fire. She thought about her home on Earth, the oceans, the blue skies, the places she might never see again. She thought about the promise she made to her crew to protect them no matter what. And she whispered quietly to herself that she would not let Arvenia fall, not while she was still breathing. At dawn, the sensors picked up movement in orbit. The alien ships had begun forming attack lines. They were going to strike the vessel directly. Ilara knew it was only a matter of time before the planet became part of that battle. She ordered all surface forces to stand by and prepare for evacuation of civilians. If things went wrong, she stood before the main screen as the image of the alien fleet filled it, rows upon rows of glowing ships moving like a swarm of fireflies across the darkness. Her heart beat faster as she watched the silent black ship still floating unmoved among them. It did not fire. It did not even react. It was as if it was waiting for something. The first attack came without warning. The Krail fired thousands of plasma rounds into the sky. The explosions lit the clouds and the shockwaves rolled across the ground, shaking buildings to the core. People screamed and took cover thinking the end had come, but when the light cleared, the strange ship was still there untouched. The plasma bolts had not even scratched its surface. Instead, the energy seemed to bend around it, vanishing like raindrops on stone. The Krail fired again and again, their ships surrounding it from every side, and yet nothing worked. The massive ship simply floated there, silent and unbroken, like a god refusing to notice the ants attacking its feet. Then it moved for the first time. The sensors screamed as the readings spiked higher than anything the human instruments had ever recorded. The entire planet trembled as the dark vessel turned its front toward the alien fleet. The black metal glowed with blue light along its edges, and for a moment, everything went quiet. There was no sound, no transmission, not even the usual hum of engines. Then a single beam of light erupted from its side. It shot through the sky so fast that no one could follow it with their eyes. And when it hit the alien ships, the entire formation disappeared. In a burst of white fire, the explosion spread like a wave, swallowing hundreds of vessels in seconds. Ilara and her crew watched in stunned silence. The enemy fleet that had held them prisoner for months was being torn apart like paper in the wind. The alien transmissions filled the air with panic and confusion. Their codes screamed, "Retreat! Retreat! Retreat!" The humans on the ground could hear it on every frequency. The sky was filled with burning wreckage falling like meteors. The ship had not only destroyed them, it had shattered their entire command structure. The remaining Krail ships turned and fled, leaving behind only silence and drifting debris. Ilara stood frozen at her console. She had seen powerful weapons before, but nothing like this. She felt small and powerless in front of the thing that now hovered above her world. She ordered her crew to send a transmission to the ship, thanking it for saving them, but also asking for identification. The message was sent, but there was no reply. Instead, a new signal arrived. It was short and came through the emergency channel. It used a human encryption pattern, but an old one from before her time. She recognized it from the archives of Earth's military code. A voice came through, the static calm, steady, and human. "Captain Miles, this is Commander Rain of the Earth defense vessel Erebus. We received your distress call. You are not alone." For a moment she could not speak. The voice continued, telling her that they had come from deep space where they had been operating beyond known territory. She asked where the Erebus came from, how it had survived all these years. The commander only replied that they were part of Project Valkyrie, and that their mission was to protect humanity at any cost. Before she could ask more questions, The signal cut off the ship above them, dimmed its lights, and became silent again. The people of Arvenia cheered when they heard the news. They thought salvation had come from Earth. They ran into the streets, hugging one another and shouting in joy. Even the soldiers who had lost everything smiled again for the first time in months. Ilara watched them from the balcony of the outpost. Her eyes, still wet with disbelief, she wanted to believe. This was real, that humanity had finally answered their cry for help. But deep inside she felt a strange unease. Something about the voice, something about the silence of the Erebus, made her wonder what kind of ship it truly was. As the day went on, the sky cleared for the first time in weeks. Sunlight broke through the clouds, shining over the wreckage of alien ships scattered across the plains. The air smelled of burned metal and ozone. The soldiers began collecting what remained of the enemy's weapons while the engineers tried to repair communication relays with the outer colonies. Everyone worked with renewed strength because they knew they were no longer fighting alone. Ilara received messages from other human bases on the planet. They all reported the same thing: the Erebus had saved them all by destroying the main fleet orbiting above. Each message ended with the same question: who were these people who commanded such power? That night, Ilara sat in her small cabin looking at the old picture of her family she had kept for years. The lights flickered from the damage in the building, but she barely noticed her mind was on the Erebus and the man who had spoken to her. She replayed the message again and again, listening to the calm voice that seemed both human and distant. She felt grateful yet afraid at the same time, because she knew that something that powerful could not exist without a reason. She wondered if Earth had built it to save them or to control something far more dangerous. Outside the window, she could see the dark shadow of the Erebus still hanging in the sky, silent and watchful. Its engines glowed faintly like eyes that never blinked. She whispered a quiet thank you, but her words were swallowed. By the wind, she knew the war was not over, and that whatever the Erebus was, it had only just begun to reveal its purpose. And deep inside her heart, she felt that this victory was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would change humanity forever. The next morning began with a quiet that felt unreal. The air above Arvenia was finally free from the endless sounds of alien engines. The people who had been hiding for months came out from the bunkers for the first time. In what felt like forever, they saw the sky without fire and smoke, and for a moment they forgot the fear that had lived inside them for so long. Children played in the streets that were still covered in dust and broken glass. Soldiers looked up at the clouds and smiled because they were alive and they knew who had saved them. The dark vessel named Erebus still floated high above the planet. It was huge and silent, a giant shadow that blocked out part of the sun. Its black metal surface reflected light in strange ways, making it look alive. Captain Ilara Miles stood outside the command center, watching it through the scope of her binoculars. She still could not believe that it was real. The ship had saved them, but it also frightened her. The reports from her scouts said that Erebus had not moved since the battle. It was as if it had gone to sleep above the planet. It gave no signals and no transmission since the last short message from Commander Rain. No one knew what it was doing or what it was waiting for. Ilara felt grateful, but she also felt uneasy. She could not stop thinking about the way it had destroyed the alien fleet with such ease. It was not human technology. At least, not any human technology she knew. Her crew worked day and night to rebuild the communication arrays to contact Earth again. They hoped to confirm that Erebus truly came from them. But every attempt failed. The long-range comms were still jammed, or maybe damaged beyond repair. They had managed to pick up small bursts of coded transmissions from the upper atmosphere, but none of them could be translated. It was like someone was sending messages in a language built from broken human patterns. Ilara listened to those signals every night, trying to make sense of them. The only thing she could tell was that they came from Erebus on the third day after the battle. One of her officers came running into the control room saying that something strange was happening in orbit. The captain rushed to the main screen and saw that Erebus was moving again. It was not leaving but rotating slowly, as if scanning the planet. Beams of blue light shot down from its hull, touching the ground in different areas of Arvenia. The lights moved across ruined cities, burned forests, and old mining sites. They did not cause any damage, but they left behind faint marks like glowing lines carved into the earth. No one knew what it was doing. The soldiers were nervous. They asked if they should prepare defenses, but Alara ordered them to hold their fire. She did not want to provoke something they did not understand. As she watched the glowing marks spreading across the surface, she noticed that they formed patterns. The beams connected different regions, drawing a network of light across the entire planet. When the pattern was complete, the ship stopped moving, and the lights faded as suddenly as they had appeared. Then came a transmission, a single, short one to all human frequencies on the planet. It said, "The operation has begun. Stand by for coordination." Everyone stared at the speakers in silence. Alara repeated the message over and over, trying to understand what operation it meant. Her science officer guessed that the Erebus might be repairing the planet's defensive systems, but no one could be sure. Hours later, the ground beneath several destroyed human bases began to shake. Heavy doors, buried deep under the soil, opened, and inside were old weapon stations from the first colonization age. Long-forgotten automated defenses that had not worked in decades now came back to life. Turrets powered up, shields activated, and the entire planet's defense grid became operational. It was as if Erebus had woken the planet itself from sleep. People cheered again, but Alara could not join them. She felt a chill as she watched the huge vessel on her screen. Every move it made felt deliberate and precise, like it was following an ancient plan that no one understood. She asked herself, how could it know about those old defense stations unless it had been here before or had maps of the colony? From long ago, her thoughts were interrupted when another message came from the Erebus. This time it was addressed directly to her captain, Miles. "Prepare your forces. We are detecting incoming movement from the outer rim." She froze at those words. The aliens were coming back. She gathered her officers and began preparing all units. They did not have many ships left, but now they had surface defenses working again. The scanners confirmed the worst. A new fleet was approaching from deep space. Not as large as the first one, but fast and organized. Alara looked at the data with a heavy heart. They had just survived one battle and now another was coming. But this time she was not afraid because Erebus was still there. She sent a message to the ship requesting support. But before she could finish the transmission, she received a reply, "We are already in position." Everyone in the control room turned their eyes to the main view screen. The image showed the black vessel moving again, its engines glowing with white-blue light. It rose higher into orbit and positioned itself between the planet and the incoming enemy fleet. It moved so smoothly that it seemed to glide through the void as if space itself made way for it. The alien ships appeared on the scanners. Moments later, a swarm of bright signals closing in. Fast, Alara felt her heart race as she watched the two forces face each other in the silence of space. Then the battle began. No one on the surface could hear the sounds, but they could see the flashes in the sky. The Erebus unleashed a storm of light that filled the heavens. Its weapons fired beams and projectiles faster than human eyes could follow. Every time it fired, several alien ships disappeared in bursts of fire and metal. The aliens fought back with everything they had, but nothing touched the dark vessel. Its shields glowed like molten glass and repelled every strike. The humans watching from below could only stare in awe and disbelief. Alara watched the readings from her sensors and realized that Erebus was not just fighting. It was learning. Every movement of the alien fleet was countered faster and faster, as if the ship was predicting their actions before they happened. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. After half an hour, the alien fleet began to break apart, their formations collapsing as they tried to escape, but Erebus did not allow it. The massive ship fired a wave of energy that swept through the battlefield and erased the remaining ships, leaving nothing but silence. Once again, the war was over. Before it had even begun, but this time something unexpected happened. Erebus itself took damage, small at first, but then growing. The sensors showed massive energy spikes across its structure. It had used so much power that its systems were becoming unstable. Alara sent urgent messages asking if they needed assistance, but there was no reply. Then a final transmission came through the static voice of Commander Rain, telling her that everything was under control and that they were only performing energy stabilization maneuvers. But Alara could hear strain in his voice. It did not sound like control. It sounded like pain. Minutes later, the ship released a burst of light that spread across the sky, covering the entire planet. Every system on Arvenia shut down for a few seconds, then came back on. The humans felt a strange sensation like a pulse passing through their bodies, as if the planet itself had been touched by something unseen. When the lights returned, Erebus was gone. It had vanished. Without any trace, the radar showed nothing. No signal. No engine trail. It was simply gone. The people were confused and scared. They did not understand what had happened. Ilara stood in silence for a long time, watching the empty sky. She felt a deep sadness and at the same time a strange connection, as if a part of her had gone with that ship. She walked outside and looked at the horizon where the sun was setting behind the wreckage of the alien ships. The wind was soft and the air smelled clean. For the first time in months, she whispered a quiet thank you to the sky and promised that if the Erebus ever returned, humanity would be ready to stand beside it, not as victims, but as allies. That night, the stars shone brighter than ever, and, for the first time in a long time, the people of Arvenia slept without fear. Though deep in the silence of space beyond all sensors and lights, the shadow of Erebus still moved unseen, watching, guarding, and waiting for the next storm that would test the strength of humankind. The days after the second battle passed slowly and quietly across Arvenia. The sky was calm again, and the air felt lighter, but the people could not stop looking up, searching for any sign of the black vessel that had saved them. Again, the Erebus was gone without a single trace, and no one knew if it had been destroyed or if it had simply vanished into deep space. Captain Ilara Miles tried every method to locate it, but her scanners found nothing. She did not want to believe that it was gone. She wanted to think that it was out there somewhere, watching them from the dark, protecting them, like before. The cities of Arvenia began to rebuild from the ashes. Soldiers worked beside civilians, clearing the wreckage and rebuilding shelters and homes. They used the materials from the destroyed alien ships to strengthen their defenses and to power the broken systems. The world was wounded, but it was alive again. People no longer whispered in fear. They spoke with pride about how humanity had stood strong and how the Erebus had come to their rescue. They told stories about its size, its power, and its silence. Children drew pictures of it in the dirt, calling it the guardian of Arvenia. And for the first time, in a long while, laughter was heard across the settlements. But inside Ilara's heart there was still unease. She could not stop thinking about the last moments before Erebus disappeared. She remembered the voice of Commander Rain sounding calm, but also distant. She remembered the strange pulse that had gone through the planet just before the ship vanished. No one could explain what it was. But ever since then, the ground scanners had picked up strange readings. Small bursts of energy, deep beneath the surface, almost like something had been planted there. Her science team said it might be leftover energy from the ship's systems, but Ilara was not sure. She had a feeling that Erebus had done something to the planet before it left one evening. As the red sun began to sink behind the mountains, her communications officer called her to the command room, saying they had received a new signal. At first she thought it was a mistake, because the frequencies used were old and unstable. But then the message came through. It was a faint human voice filled with static. Captain Miles, this is Commander Rain. Do not be alarmed. We are in orbit above the outer rim. The Erebus is operational. The line cut for a few seconds, and then the voice returned. We have detected incoming enemy activity from beyond the sector. The Krail are regrouping. They are sending something larger than before. We will intercept, but we need planetary support. Prepare all defense systems. Ilara's hands shook as she listened. She tried to reply, but the channel was one way. The message ended with a final sentence: we fight for humanity, and then silence. The entire command team sprang into action. Alarms rang across the outpost and soldiers rushed to their positions. The old defense systems that Erebus had awakened began to power up across the surface, glowing faintly in the dark, like lines of fire spreading through the ground. The shields around the main cities flickered to life for the first time in years, and massive turrets rose from the bunkers ready to fire. The people knew what was happening. They could see it in the sky where strange lights began to appear again. The battle was coming. Hours later, the scanners confirmed the report. A massive alien fleet was entering the system, far larger than the last two. It was not only Krail ships but several other species that had joined them, frightened by the power that humanity had shown. They wanted to destroy Arvenia before it became a symbol of resistance. Ilara stood before the big screen as the images came in. It was an armada like nothing she had ever seen. Her crew looked at her waiting for orders. She told them that they would hold the planet no matter what they had to, buy the Erebus enough time to fight. Then through the static of their long-range sensors they saw it. The Erebus reappeared between the stars, shining faintly like a dark sun. It was larger now, or maybe it looked larger because of the light around it. Its engines glowed blue and its hull reflected the fire of distant stars. It was completely silent, but its presence filled every human heart with strength when the alien fleet detected it. They slowed their advance as if they had met a nightmare that they did not wish to face again. The first wave of alien fighters charged and the battle began. The humans on the surface could only watch as streaks of light filled the sky. The Erebus moved through the swarm with impossible speed. Every shot it fired tore through enemy ships and left nothing behind. It was like watching the storm itself take shape. The enemy tried to surround it, but the ship anticipated, every move striking them before they even reached position. Ilara's scanners showed that the Erebus was coordinating with the planetary defenses. It sent coded pulses to the ground turrets, which then fired at precise intervals, each shot landing exactly where the aliens were weakest. It was like the entire planet had become part of the ship's mind. The sky above Arvenia burned brighter than day. People came out of the bunkers to watch. Even though it was dangerous, they could not look away. From the sight of their savior fighting for them, the ground shook as explosions lit the upper atmosphere. Some alien vessels broke through the Erebus defense line and headed for the planet. But before they could reach it, the ship released dozens of small drones that intercepted them. The drones moved like living creatures weaving through fire and metal. They rammed into the enemy ships and detonated, destroying them in flashes of white light. The people cheered as each one fell. Ilara stood on the balcony outside her command post and watched the horizon. The entire world seemed alive with energy. The lights of the defense systems pulsed in rhythm with the Erebus guns. The sound of thunder rolled across the plains as fragments of enemy ships rained down like falling stars. It was a beautiful and terrifying sight. Then she heard her communications officer shouting from inside, "They are sending a message." She ran in and listened to the voice of Commander Rain again. It was calm and strong. "Arvenia, your fight is not only for survival, it is for the future of our kind. The enemy fears us. Because we are not machines, we are not slaves to logic, we are human, and we stand together." The voice faded, but his words filled every heart with fire. The soldiers shouted in pride and redoubled their efforts. The remaining alien ships began to retreat, their formations breaking apart as Erebus cut through them one by one. But then something unexpected happened. A massive object appeared behind the enemy lines. It was larger than any ship anyone had ever seen. It was not a vessel. It was a moving fortress, a colossal structure that emitted waves of energy strong enough to shake the planet itself. The sensors screamed with warnings. Ilara looked at the readings and her blood turned cold. It was a weapon designed to destroy worlds. Erebus turned to face it, and for the first time since it appeared, it sent a signal to the ground that said, "Planetary evacuation is not possible. We will engage, prepare for impact." The voice of Commander Rain came again, saying, "This will be the last strike if we fall. Humanity must continue. You must rebuild. You must not lose faith." Then the Erebus moved straight toward the alien fortress. The two Titans met in the middle of space and the sky exploded in blinding light. From the surface it looked like the heavens themselves were tearing apart. The humans fell to their knees, shielding their eyes from the brightness. The sensors went offline. The entire communication network went silent for several minutes. When the light finally faded, the alien fortress was gone, destroyed completely, and in its place there was only drifting debris. The Erebus was still there, but barely. Its hull burned and cracked, its engines fading. It had taken terrible damage, but it was alive. Ilara sent every signal she could, begging them to return to orbit and rest, but the voice that answered her was faint and soft, saying, "We will not stay, we must finish what we started." The Erebus began to move away slowly, turning its broken hull toward the edge of the system. Ilara watched as it disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a trail of faint light. The people of Arvenia stood in silence, some crying, some saluting, others simply looking up with gratitude and sorrow. They knew they might never see the ship again, but they also knew it had saved them more than once and had given them something far greater than safety. It had given them hope. That night Ilara walked alone through the quiet ruins. The stars shone above, brighter than ever. She stopped and looked at the sky, whispering that if the Erebus could hear her, she wanted to thank it for everything and promise that humanity would not forget what it had done. She knew deep in her heart that the Erebus was not just a ship. It was a symbol of what humans could become when pushed beyond their limits. It was the fury, the courage, and the soul of humanity made into steel and light. She smiled softly as the wind passed through the broken streets, and in the distance for just a second, she thought she saw a faint flash among the stars, like a farewell signal from the guardian of Arvenia, before it vanished into the dark. Forever years passed after the Battle of Arvenia, and the world began to heal again. The people worked hard to rebuild their cities and farms, and slowly the scars of war started to fade. The alien wrecks that had once littered the fields were melted down, and, used to build new machines and new homes, the memory of the Erebus was still strong in every heart, and people spoke of it as if it were a legend. Some said it had returned to the stars to guard other human colonies. Some said it was destroyed, and its crew became part of the stars themselves. No one truly knew, but everyone wanted to believe that somewhere out there the ship was still alive, still watching over them. Captain Ilara Miles became the leader of the Planetary Council. She was respected by everyone for her courage and wisdom. She had led them through the darkest days, and now she led them toward a new future. Under her guidance, Arvenia turned into one of the strongest and most peaceful human colonies in the outer systems they built. New defenses, new research centers, and even a new fleet of smaller ships inspired by the Erebus. Each of these ships carried a piece of the black metal found on the battlefield. People called it the blood of Erebus, and said it had mysterious energy. Property scientists could not explain it, but they felt that the metal responded to human emotion. It glowed faintly when people touched it, as if it recognized them. Ilara often went to the memorial built on the mountain where the first alien attack had begun. There stood a giant statue of the Erebus carved from black stone, and beneath it, the names of the crew who had fought for humanity. Including Commander Rain, she would stand there in silence, remembering his calm voice and the way he had spoken of hope even in the middle of chaos. She often wondered if he had known that his sacrifice would inspire an entire generation to rise again. One night while Ilara was working late in her office, the power suddenly flickered across the city. The systems went down for a few seconds, then came back online. But the communications network began to show strange readings. Her officers rushed in saying that an unknown signal was coming from deep space. It was weak, but repeating the same pattern. Over and over, Ilara ordered them to decode it, and when the computer finally translated the message, her heart stopped. It was a single word repeated again and again: Erebus. The entire command center froze in silence for a moment. They checked and rechecked the data, thinking it must be a mistake, but the signal was real, and it was coming from beyond the outer rim. Exactly where the Erebus had disappeared years ago. Ilara felt something inside her awaken, a mixture of fear and hope. She ordered a small fleet of scout ships to prepare for launch. They were going to trace the signal and find out what was out there. She decided to lead the mission herself, even though her advisors begged her not to go. She told them that she owed it to the ship and to the people who had saved them. After several days of preparation, the fleet left Arvenia and entered deep space. They traveled through quiet regions filled with old wrecks and forgotten debris, passing through strange energy fields and broken satellite trails. The stars grew brighter and colder. The deeper they went, the signal became stronger but also more distorted. It was as if someone or something was trying to reach them through time and distance. Ilara barely slept during the journey. She kept listening to the repeating tone of the signal, thinking about Commander Rain's voice and the final message he had sent before the last battle. Finally, after many days, they reached the source of the transmission. It was a massive debris field drifting in the darkness, pieces of alien metal and human wreckage floating together like a graveyard. The scanners showed traces of radiation, but no life forms. The signal was coming from the center of the field. Ilara ordered the ships to move in slowly, their lights cutting through the dust and wreckage. As they approached, they saw something that made everyone gasp. It was the Erebus, or what was left of it. The hull was torn and burned, but still intact. The great black vessel floated, silently among the ruins like a sleeping giant. The moment the main scanner locked onto the ship, the signal stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. Ilara's crew looked at her, waiting for orders. She told them they were going aboard. Despite the risks, they approached one of the damaged docking bays and entered the ship. The air inside was thin and cold. The corridors were dark, but still held power. Faint lights flickered on as they walked through the halls, as if the ship was recognizing them. The walls were covered in strange marks, symbols and patterns that no one could understand, but they all felt that the ship was alive in some way. They reached the command bridge and found it empty. The consoles were covered in dust and wires hung from the ceiling. Ilara touched the captain's chair and felt a low vibration through the metal. The system suddenly came to life. Screens lit up, and the familiar voice of the ship's AI echoed through the room, saying, "Welcome back, Captain Miles." She froze and whispered that it could not be real. The AI continued, saying that the Erebus had completed its final mission and returned for her. The ship explained that after the last battle it had entered a dormant state to repair itself, but it had been waiting for a human command signal to wake it fully again. Ilara felt tears in her eyes. She could not believe it. The Erebus had survived somehow, its systems still operational, its memory still intact. But before she could ask more questions, the lights flickered again and warning alarms filled the bridge. The sensors detected multiple warp signatures appearing at the edge of the field. Enemy ships. They were back, the same alien species, but this time they had come prepared, hundreds of vessels closing in fast. The Erebus began to power up on its own engines, rumbling deep within the hull. Ilara and her crew rushed to their stations. The AI said calmly that combat mode was being reactivated. The damaged ship roared to life. The dark metal began to glow blue, and the energy cores reignited like a heart starting to beat again. The humans on the smaller fleet outside watched in awe as the Erebus moved forward through the debris field, pushing aside wreckage with its shields. Ilara gave the order to engage the enemy. The first shots were fired, and the space around them lit up with explosions. The Erebus moved slower than before, but every shot it fired hit with deadly precision. Each blast tore through alien ships as if the ship still remembered how to fight. The battle raged on, and Ilara realized that the Erebus had been waiting all this time for this moment. It had known that the enemy would return, and it had called her to finish what had been started. She commanded the ship with determination, her voice steady and strong. Guiding her crew through the chaos, the alien fleet began to falter, unable to match the sheer force of the Erebus. The dark vessel fired its main cannon once more, and the blast consumed the enemy command ship in a blinding wave of energy. When the battle ended, there was silence again. The debris floated quietly in the dark. The Erebus engines dimmed, but the ship remained. Steady, Ilara sat in the captain's chair, breathing heavily. She looked around at her crew and saw the same mix of exhaustion and pride. The AI spoke softly, saying, "Mission complete, humanity endures." Ilara closed her eyes and whispered that they would never forget what this ship had done. They returned to Arvenia, carrying the remains of the Erebus with them. It was placed in orbit above the planet as a monument to courage and unity. Its dark hull shining faintly under the sun, the people looked up and knew that even in the darkest times, hope would always find a way to return, because humanity was never truly alone. As long as the spirit of the Erebus lived within them, many years passed since the day the Erebus returned to defend humanity, and once again vanished into the endless sea of stars. The name of the ship became sacred to all humans across the colonies, and it was no longer seen as just a vessel of war, but as a symbol of strength, courage, and unity. The people of Arvenia looked at the sky every night, hoping that one day they might see its shadow again, floating quietly among the stars. The wreck that was brought back had been placed in orbit and turned into a living monument. Scientists worked on it carefully, studying every inch of its strange black metal while pilgrims from across the human worlds came to pay their respects. They believed the Erebus was not only built by human hands, but guided by something far beyond them, something that wanted to protect humankind from being lost in the darkness forever. Captain Ilara Miles, who had once led the mission to find the Erebus, grew older and wiser. She was now known as Admiral Miles, the first leader of the newly formed Human Defense Union. A council, made from the leaders of every human colony. She dedicated her life to preparing humanity for the next challenge. She believed, deep inside, that the return of the Erebus and the final battle were not the end, but a warning. The enemies they fought were only one piece of a much larger threat, something hidden in the cold space between galaxies. She spent her last years building fleets, teaching young captains and spreading a single message that humanity must stay united, no matter how far apart their worlds may be. One evening, as she stood at the observation deck of the Arvenian command tower, she looked up at the night sky. The stars shone bright, and the hull of the Erebus monument glowed faintly as it orbited the planet. It looked peaceful and eternal, but there was something new in the sky, a strange light far beyond the horizon. It moved slowly, unlike any natural object. Her heart beat faster as she ordered her officers to scan it. The computers worked for minutes before confirming that it was not a meteor or a satellite. It was a vessel, and it was massive, bigger than the Erebus itself, and it was heading toward human space. The council gathered at once, and panic spread across the colonies. Some believed it was another alien fleet, others thought it was a trick or a ghost, but Alara knew in her heart that this was the storm that the Erebus had tried to warn them about. She stood before the council, calm and steady, and said that they would face whatever came with the same courage their ancestors had shown. Her voice carried across every communication channel, and her words reminded people of the battles fought long ago. They began to prepare the defenses, activating the old network that Erebus had awakened years ago. The shield towers glowed blue. The fleets rose from the shipyards, and soldiers trained day and night, waiting for the unknown visitor. Days later, the light from the sky reached the outer sensors, and what they saw left everyone silent. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was not alien nor fully human. Its shape was long and dark, with glowing patterns running across its hull. It emitted no threat signals, and yet its presence felt powerful and strange. When the first clear image came through the scanners, people gasped because it looked almost exactly like the Erebus, but newer, stronger and more alive. It was made of the same dark metal, but it pulsed with light, like a beating heart. Alara ordered an open communication channel and waited for a response for hours. There was nothing but static. Then suddenly a voice came through. It was deep, calm, and familiar. It said, "This is Commander Rain of the Erebus 2, requesting permission to dock at Arvenia Station." The entire room went silent. Alara could not move for a moment. She felt as if time had stopped. She whispered his name, but it made no sense. Rain had been gone for decades. How could this be? The voice continued, saying, "We have returned with what was promised." The line then went dead, and the giant ship began to descend toward the planet. The people gathered across the world, watching the sky as the massive vessel entered the atmosphere. It moved slowly through the clouds, glowing with blue fire, until it came to rest above the Erebus monument in orbit. The two ships hung there together, one ancient and broken, the other new, and shining as if past and future had met in one moment. Alara and her team were taken aboard the new ship by a shuttle. When they entered, they were met by figures that looked human but slightly different, taller, with calm eyes and glowing patterns on their skin. They spoke softly, saying that they were the descendants of the original Erebus crew. They explained that after the final battle, the Erebus had drifted through space until it was found by a group of explorers beyond the known rim. The ship had merged with new forms of energy and technology that changed the crew, giving them long life and deeper understanding of space and time. They had not abandoned humanity. They had been preparing, building a new ship that could protect not just one planet but all of human space. The new Erebus carried a network core that could link every colony and every defense system into one united shield. Rain appeared before Alara, still looking young. Though decades had passed for her, he told her that humanity had reached a point where it could finally stand without fear, but that the threat they had once faced was not gone. It was still growing somewhere far beyond their galaxies. Alara listened in silence, tears forming in her eyes, not out of sadness but pride. She realized that everything they had fought for had meaning. The return of the Erebus was proof that human strength did not come from weapons or ships, but from their will to survive and protect each other. She stood beside Rain looking out at the stars from the bridge of the new ship. He told her that the Erebus II would remain in orbit for as long as humanity needed it, serving as both guardian and guide the humans on Arvenia. Watched as the two great ships floated together. The old one, a reminder of sacrifice. The new one, a promise of tomorrow. Weeks passed and life began to change again under the protection of the new Erebus. The Human Defense Union began exploring deeper space. New colonies were established, and new alliances were formed with other civilizations who had once feared humans. Now they saw them as equals, as builders of peace. Alara spent her final years watching the rise of this new era. She often visited the Erebus monument to speak quietly to the stars, thanking those who had made it possible. One evening as the sun set, she closed her eyes and felt a